Ever since we've been doing these videos, I've had a lot of questions about the cue. How it's made, what should I be looking for when I buy a cue, etc. With that in mind, if you remember, we went along to Cuecraft of Nottinghamshire in England, and we asked them to show us how a cue is made. That cue, which I've still got, is a one-piece cue. Now, I've been using a 3/4 jointed cue, and I wanted to know the difference, the playing difference, shall we say, between a one-piece cue and a 3/4 cue. Well, for me personally, I can't find any real playing difference. You know, you can get used to either. I know that some professionals say they can feel the shot better. For me, it makes no difference. So purely for carrying the cue around, I prefer the 3/4 jointed cue. And that's what I've been using. Whilst I was in Thailand with young Kyron Wilson, I came across a company called Maximus Cues. Now, I'd heard of them before, but I'd never seen one of their product. I had heard that they made a good product, but I wanted to see it for myself. So I asked them to make me a cue to my specifications. Well, that cue was recently delivered to me. And first and foremost, I've got to say, you know, it looks beautiful. When you come to selecting a piece of wood to make a cue, it's based on experience and what it looks like, what it feels like to those experts. I'm not an expert in selecting the cue, I just know what it looks like and plays like. But it's obvious, pretty obvious straight away, that they have selected a very nice piece of wood, because this grain is perfectly straight. Wonderful piece of wood. The specifications for it, as I say, were down to my specifications. The cue is 58 inches long, which is pretty near standard. It has a thinnish butt, so one, because I've got short, fat fingers, and I wanted a slightly thinner butt. Beautifully crafted here, dark piece of wood, we're inlaid with the brown, just to indicate that it's mine. And then we come to the nameplate. If you look on the cues of today, the good manufacturers will have that flat piece there in line with the chevrons. So the chevrons here are all in line with the nameplate and the flat on the end. And I like to use that uppermost, and I suppose really that advertises their product. If it was down underneath, we don't see it, there's no advertisement. There it's on the top, there is an advertisement. So that's one of the reasons they do that. The weight of it is 17.5 ounces. The tip size is 9.5 millimetre, and the tip is nicely rounded on the end. You don't want a flat tip, you know, nicely rounded. That means that you've got more tip in contact with the cue ball. If you've got more contact with the cue ball, you'll get more reaction with less effort and less chance of a miscue. So pay a lot of attention to your tip. Don't abuse it. That's the only thing in contact with the cue ball. So time to look after it. Whilst we're on the tip, let me just say that, you know, most players use the cue one way round. Yeah, they don't like turning the cue around, and using it all different manner. The reason behind that, okay, is because they use the chevrons maybe for sighting, but also that the tip wears down to how they play the shot, even to how they chalk the tip. I think I made reference to it in another video where I compared it to a fountain pen. You know, somebody who uses a fountain pen wears that nib down, how they write specifically. They would not lend you their fountain pen to write because you will write slightly differently, and the tip, the nib of the pen will wear down slightly differently. It's the same with the cue. I use it with the chef runs up, so this tip is going to wear down to how I strike the cue ball that is, and how I chalk the tip. So if I lend it to you now, okay, 1 or 2 shots won't make any difference, but over a period of time it can make a difference, right? So a professional or a good player will not allow you to use his cue. When the cue came, it's come in a nice protective metal case. They've also provided me with a telescopic extension, which makes it very handy. And obviously that can screw into the end of the cue. From there, I can reach most shots with that. From here, and also I've got the 6-inch one, just for the odd shot where you have to just reach a little bit. Saves me using the rest. Coming back to the cue, there's no varnish on the cue. I hate the damn stuff on a cue. There's oil on here, yeah, which preserves it and makes it look nice, but there's no need to have any varnish. Not in my opinion. It's what the cheaper cue manufacturers do, and it certainly makes it look nice. But there are some very, very good players who will have varnish on the butt. They prefer varnish on the butt. It helps them to grip. Normally you don't put varnish on the shaft. I don't like it on any part of the cue, but that's just my personal preference. Just delving on the history of a cue, which people have asked about a little bit. While the game was evolving, the game was played with what they called a mace, and all it was a piece of wood. Then we had the flat bit there with a T-piece on the end, and they used to shove the ball along. Over a period of time, somebody came along and said, well, I can be more accurate if I turn the cue around, or the mace around, and used 2 hands. Eventually, a piece of leather was stuck on the end, and then the chalk evolved just to reduce the amount of miscues. Equally, the game was played socially by men and women, and in the Victorian era, the ladies wore low-cut gowns, and it was considered a little bit unladylike to get down and play the shot like that, so they would still use 1 hand, whilst the men would probably use 2 hands. Now, I hope that clears a few things up about the cue. Based on my own personal experience now, I know there are plenty of other cue manufacturers out there that make a good product. I'm talking about my personal experience. I have a cue made by John Parrish, I have a cue made by Cuecraft of Nottingham, and now I have a cue made from Thailand by Maximus Cues. And they are 3 manufacturers that I really, based on personal experience, that I can recommend. On a final note about the cue, I'd like to say that, a cue, okay, it's a piece of wood, but it's a piece of wood that becomes very personal to you as a player. Now, if I compare this cue with my other cue, my original cue that I've been using, this is slightly more robust, not quite as flexible as the other one. Now, that is quite significant when you're playing certain shots, particularly those when you play with side. Now, my original cue will push off slightly, marginally. If I'm applying right-hand side, it will get pushed to the left marginally. Now, that same amount of side with this cue will move slightly more to the left, so it pushes off slightly more. Now, if I change cue, if I lost that cue or it became broken and I've now got to switch to this one, then it will take a certain length of time for me to get used to it. There's no doubt about that. It will be a different feel. So, a cue should be personalised for you. You know, we think about the length, the weight, the balance, the thickness of the butt, which I place a lot of emphasis on. If you've got short, fat fingers like I have, it's no good having a thick butt. You know, somebody who's got really long fingers can manage a thicker butt. I'm well aware of that. Now, I practice a lot with Michael Holt, who's got short fingers. He's a professional player. And his cue is, the butt of his cue is a lot thinner than mine. And if he picks up anything that's even thicker, he feels as though he's got a broom handle in his hand. So that indicates how important it is for you to get used to a piece of wood. The expression that it becomes an extension of your arm. So important, and so very true. So what you require in terms of a cue can only be determined by experience that you get. You'll pick a cue up, play with it, get used to it. Eventually you can decide, right, it would be better if it was a little bit thicker or a little bit thinner. Now you become aware of what's going to suit you as a player. And once you get those specifications correct, then you will get used to it and you will not want to change your cue. So good luck with that and good luck with your practice.